So almost, you can set up a fake website which looks like a genuine website, acts like a genuine website.
That many things have become cheaper and easier to produce in terms of content, in terms of simulations of social media. So it's quite essential to actually think seriously about offensive operations. I definitely see more information operations intended to undermine public trust in governments that want to beef up defenses.
Welcome to the Osavul podcast. This is where we explore the front line of the information environment, how hybrid operations are evolving, and what governments, institutions, and the public can do to stay resilient. It's a great privilege to introduce our guest today, Maria Golubeva, co-founder of the crisis simulation company Meleys, and one of Europe's foremost experts on hybrid threats. She's previously served as Latvia's Minister of Interior and as a Member of Parliament. She has trained senior officials and security officers across Eastern Europe, NATO, and the Middle East. Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Very pleased to be here.
We're recording on a Friday. It's mid-December, and so it seems like an appropriate time to reflect on the year that's passed. So let's start with the big picture. How have information and hybrid operations played out and evolved in 2025?
Well, if we speak about the broader picture of hybrid operations, then I would say we have seen the decline of, or maybe temporary decline of undersea cable disruptions, because NATO is apparently fairly effective with its Baltic sentry protection against such episodes. But on the other hand, we see more drone incursions, especially disruptions of the airspace, of civilian airspace, not just because of drones, but also cases of spoofing and jamming as sometimes before. And we also have seen disruption from cyber attacks on, for example, booking systems for airports, which altogether has created a very turbulent year for civilian aviation in Europe. So I think that's one trend of 2025. Then definitely cyber attacks have not gone down. On the contrary, they continue, and the landscape of threat actors in the cyber domain is as ever changing, but at the same time, the ATPs, the fairly permanent ones are still there. I mean, starting with the by now legendary hacker groups associated with various Russian state structures, such as Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear, etc., but then also many hacktivist collectives and newer groups. So that landscape keeps evolving, and it's with us, unfortunately. As far as information operations are concerned, of course, the domain is highly varied. We have seen massive attempt to undermine the elections in Moldova. It failed, but basically it failed by a very small margin, so to say. And interestingly enough, if one listens to the defender community, we have also seen operations by NATO members against other NATO members.
And if we just kind of look at the hybrid threats first, and then we go into the information environment, there's been plenty of news this year about the blend of, as you say, cyber, but also information, but economic and physical sabotage threats, critical infrastructure being targeted quite a lot. How have you kind of seen this evolution and change of hybrid threats, this blend of these tactics?
Well, I don't know whether it's evolution or it's exploiting specific vulnerabilities that lend themselves to be exploited. I would be a little bit cautious about speaking about evolution. I think wider use of drones might be one feature which is more of an evolution type. Because, of course, drones can be used in various creative ways. And I'm a little bit worried that the drone tracking systems in Europe and Canada, as I hear, are not always up to scratch. They are getting improved, but the possibility of using drones for disruptive activities in Europe is still rather high. And we have seen that when that happens, then, for example, if it's just an incursion, if it's an incursion of Russian military type drones, which is said to be purely accidental, we see that very expensive systems need to be activated in order to basically to hit them. And that, of course, produces the impression of a certain weakness, which is also not a signal that we probably want a European population to see.
And has there anything surprised you this year? If we kind of, look back at 2025, was there anything that, you maybe just didn't expect, or was there any kind of shocks that's worth highlighting?
Well, I was rather shocked to hear about information operations by NATO members against NATO members. Unfortunately, I can't go very much into details here, but it seems that there are information operations all around, and people use them in a kind of fairly trivial, everyday way for various minor tactical goals without even necessarily, well, at least not obviously having some grand strategy. It's just that this landscape lends itself to be exploited and people exploit it. I also read some fairly stunning reports about the business niche that information manipulation provides these days to many people who are basically entrepreneurs selling those services to various state and non-state purchasers, so to say. And in concurrence with that, all the gray and illicit financing operations that fund such and other hybrid actions also are blossoming, it seems, for example, in the Western Balkans. And that is something that overall creates the impression of an increasingly chaotic threat landscape, which I suppose is the nature of this hybrid warfare, even though the term itself is widely contested and many people say this is just warfare, and warfare has always been very diverse historically.
Yes, I've heard that myself. What is so hybrid about these tactics? If they've kind of if information has always been used in warfare, and you always kind of use whatever is a strength of yours. Kind of looking at those information operations, what about the kind of channels on the kind of operational tactical level? Have you seen any rises, kind of new players to the scene? There's been a lot of talk about the TikTok factor and just the reach of some channels.
Well, TikTok has been big, not just in 2025. Also, X is still one of the main playgrounds of information manipulation and various operations. I think that looking into the future, there are interesting trends being discussed by people who look at the way AI is developing towards more use of AI avatars in social media. And I mean, an avatar is more than just a chatbot, right? It is supposed to be representing a certain persona, a digital persona who speaks to you, impersonating some kind of real persona, and that is something that becomes increasingly cheap to produce for all kinds of purposes. I mean, for simulations, for crisis simulations, we have now developed our own for simulating social media when you want to see certain type of social media users, how they will react to this type of event. And your client may want to see that too. So you create those avatars based on Grok, for example, for X, and they represent certain demographics, how they react to certain events. But we have to be aware that, of course, threat actors also use this technology. I mean, if we can use it, they can do so too. And the whole landscape of bots is becoming more sophisticated. So I suppose that's one of the things, because people often say, well, AI empowers those bot factories, but we very seldom hear how exactly. And I think it's important a little bit to unpack that. That's why I took the time to explain what it is. And another thing is, of course, well, amplification per se. The creation of networks is much faster. The creation of fake websites is much faster. And basically, networks of fake websites are now the main vehicle of information manipulation and information operations and campaigns.
So almost, you can set up a fake website which looks like a genuine website, acts like a genuine website, but it's really just a front for you to kind of push out your own propaganda in a sense.
Well, yes, but it's not usually used in such a simple way. I mean, what is done is to use it for cross-referencing other websites with similar messages or narratives, and it's apparently basically impossible. It's becoming impossible to take down some specific narrative to push it out of the information environment if it's harmful. It's actually these days apparently easier to go after the actors who produce this, after the entrepreneurs who create the infrastructure, after the funders. If, of course, they are not hiding inside an authoritarian regime, which, of course, protects them.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on, what can be done in a second. And I do want to kind of just discuss those actors in relation also to AI. There's been a lot of, news headlines throughout the year in 2025 about the investment of, countries like China in AI. I think also I'd like to hear your take on, the private sector versus kind of the this world of kind of information operations and hybrid threats. A lot of commentators on AI in general feel like there's been a lot of hype around AI, but there hasn't maybe been the the uptick or the implementation across maybe the business world as some of the hype. How have you seen AI change throughout the year?
Well, I've definitely seen on the production side, so to say, as someone who has been working with my colleague on this simulation platform for simulating various hybrid threats and crises for companies. Obviously, I have seen that many things have become cheaper and easier to produce in terms of content, in terms of simulations of social media users' content, in terms of producing other kind of content, videos. Very realistic videos of various disruptions and various events can be produced at the fraction of a cost that it would have cost before. And all of that, of course, means that the information space is full of content which is produced also by threat actors using the same and even bigger capacities. So whether we will be able to find ways to actually rely on some more curated types of content on the internet becomes a question which is more than philosophical. It becomes a practical question of survival for basically rule of law based societies, and that's frightening. But on the other hand, I think the instruments we have are a little bit outdated because for example, the EU AI Act, which is much criticized, it was written too early. So the internet as it is now and AI as it is now is simply not, I mean, it's not what this is about. And from that point of view, of course, many experts point to the fact that we need probably some other policy tools. But the question is whether those policy tools will not be, again, too late and futile in protecting information environment. So we need more creative approaches to protecting information environment. That's why I mentioned the need to think of how we deal with the actors, with the threat actors who produce and amplify this content rather than with the content itself.
And yeah, kind of moving on to what can be done. Resilience is a term that is brought up all the time. What's your views on building kind of more offensive capabilities? Do you think that crosses a line for kind of democracies? Is that something that democracies need to be really careful about? What is it that what more can be done?
This is why I've been mentioning several times the actors, the threat actors who basically, for their own purposes, use our information environment destructively and disrupt our countries and our economies and our political systems. I think it's not a question of whether we should, because this question is a question from yesterday. I think we are obviously in a situation where we have to, otherwise Europe as we know it might not survive. So it's quite essential to actually think seriously about offensive operations, both in information environment and in cyber. And there are countries that just go ahead and do it. I mean, I think Britain does lots of offensive cyber already, and there are other countries that do it. Even within Europe, they don't like to talk much about it, but they do it. So I definitely think this is the time to come up rather quickly with some guardrails or principles for offensive information operations as we as Europeans are prepared to do them against threat actors, especially the authoritarians who want to undermine our way of life and our political systems.
And do you have any, practical experiences that you could share with us, perhaps from your, experience from Latvia? And are there any lessons that we can take, for kind of the EU and NATO going forwards?
I rather see in Latvia the reflection of the same trends that I see elsewhere. First of all, the European Union has this slightly antiquated concept of foreign information manipulation and influence, FIMI. And the problem is that much of information manipulation is produced domestically in Latvia, as it is in Germany, as it is in Hungary, and in many other places. The actors who, for various reasons, use information environment as a field for their offensives for their offensive operations are often inside our own societies. And they might be purely mundane goals, not some grand conspiracy goals or colluding with Russia or something of the kind, but there are hundreds of other reasons why they do it. So either, for example, to gain more political traction or to gain traction locally. For example, in many countries, there are politicians who are very confrontational towards the pro-European, pro-Ukraine course of their governments. And they use every opportunity to come up with criticisms, very often unfounded and manipulative criticisms based in accusations or information that is not really factually proven. And they do it very much on social media. And in Latvia, we see it a lot. For example, basically every excuse, every vulnerability in the delivery of public services by the government, by public institutions, in any kind of major political shifts, the relations with the United States, the peace negotiations, anything is an excuse to say, look, how those sort of center-right, pro-European, pro-Ukraine politicians, how awkward they are, how they do not deliver internationally, they do not deliver nationally, they do not deliver to you in this city. And that is the type of domestic information manipulation that we see a lot.
And looking to next year, I mean, we're speaking here on a Friday, mid-December. Maybe the crystal ball moment. If you held a crystal ball, what are your predictions? What do you kind of foresee for the year ahead?
I definitely see more information operations intended to undermine public trust in governments that want to beef up defenses, to spend more on defense, to spend more on security. I can see lots of potential information operations undermining this effort, saying that the threats are fake, the threats have been fabricated, especially to spend money on the military things at the expense of bread and butter. So a lot of manipulation of guns versus butter debate. A lot of manipulation still of the migration topic. It's not going away, I think, in any ways. I think even more sophisticated AI-enabled operations by Russia and its proxies all across Europe, not just Eastern Europe, and of course, still a lot of information manipulation for preventing stronger Europe and stronger Ukraine in whatever form that is feasible, which I think will be combined with actions against critical infrastructure, with possibly likely more drones, more cyber attacks on critical infrastructure companies, and most probably there will be more multi-domain operations where, for example, sabotage or cyber is activated together with information operations.
And for our listeners, is there a particular blind spot, weakness, concern that we should be more aware of moving into next year?
I definitely think that for policymakers, it's the fact that our defenses against our security setup against hybrid threats is divided into silos. There is the silo for fighting information operations, for protecting our societies from disinformation actors. There is a silo for cyber, for protecting our critical infrastructure and IT systems from cyber threats. And there is a silo from in intelligence agencies protecting from sabotage. But there is very little fusion going on. There is, of data and information. There is not enough close coordination, which would enable our countries and the EU as a whole to see when those multi-domain operations are taking place. And I think that is something, that is a vulnerability that should be, that should be addressed as soon as possible.
You might have already answered this next question, but I'll go ahead with it anyway. But if you were advising a government tomorrow, what's the first capability they should invest in?
Coordination. It seems like very trivial answer to give, but if you think in terms of when do people working on foreign information manipulation talk to people working on domestic information manipulation, if at all? When do they talk to people working on cyber threats? When do they talk to people working on preventing sabotage and protecting critical entities? So more whole government effort, more whole government exercises, drills, simulations, and more policy instruments for daily coordination.
Well, Maria, thank you for joining the Osavul podcast and for sharing your expertise. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this episode valuable. And while Christmas parties and end of year celebrations might be front of mind, the reality is that hybrid and information threats aren't going anywhere, and they will continue to shape and challenge and at times disrupt our societies. And at Osavul, our mission is to give our partners situational awareness and control over uncertainty. So as we wrap up for the year, we really appreciate your support, and for everyone dialing in, your curiosity, your engagement. Enjoy the holiday season, stay safe, and we look forward to bringing you more conversations in the new year.